We now have two special guests who are going to have a conversation here right now. We have the former CEO of Barclays, Antony Jenkins, who has flown all the way from London to be here today. He is now the CEO of 10x Future Technologies, and he's trying now to really transform banking from the outside. And here to interview him is the one of my favorite podcasts, the host of Breaking Banks and the CEO of Moven. Please welcome Brett King and Antony Jenkins. Thanks, Antony.
We were backstage doing a selfie with Alex, and we ran out of time. But hi, guys. Hey, thanks for having us. All right, so I'm sure Antony doesn't need any introduction, but I think to kick this off today, you've come from the beast of the belly, Antony. You know, you were a banker, and now you're a reformed banker.
We really look forward to having you in
China.
China.
FinTech. And can I ask you, when was the moment that you realised that it was all changing and you had to be a part of whatever this new space was going to be?
Well, 35 years in the industry, 13 years actually working here in the United States. I was always asking myself this one question from the mid-90s forward. There's so much technology in banking, but why doesn't it ever make a difference? Why doesn't it really change banking in the way that you see in other industries, whether it's content, shopping, travel, those types of things? And I was asking myself that question at Barclays. I think we did a lot of great stuff in trying to move the organization forward. But it was clear to me that the technology was changing very fast, and it was hard to move the organization at the same pace. So when I left, I spent a lot of time looking at what was going on in FinTech, looked at over 400 FinTech companies. I met with 50 different ones, trying to figure out what was going on in the landscape. And it just seemed to me that we'd come to a point where the technology sophistication and its cost had reached the point where it could create true transformation in the industry. And that's really why I've decided in the next phase of my career to work on things that are about that transformation.
So how many of you would identify yourself as part of an incumbent or a traditional financial services company? Right? How many of you would identify yourself as part of a startup or a FinTech or a technology support? Okay, so it seems like about half and half of the audience here. Now, we just heard from Alex, of course, on blockchain and how that's changing things in the world. So, but blockchain is just one of the technologies that we see that has the potential to be really revolutionary and sort of change a lot about what we're doing here. So, is this about sort of a partial application of technology into specific areas? Is it a first principles reboot of financial services? Are we going to end up with something completely different, or is it something in between?
So I think it's probably all of the above. In my view, this is going to have a number of different waves that will happen over time. And there's no doubt that the industry, particularly in the developed world, has done a lot to incrementally embrace new technology. But as I said before, it never really made a difference until mobile came along, because mobile means that you can now carry your bank in your pocket. And so certainly in Europe, and particularly in the UK, we're seeing significant declines in traffic in branches, for example, because people would much rather bank on their phone.
Who would have seen that coming, I guess?
Indeed. People have been predicting that for years. I remember I was here in the 90s, and through the first internet wave, and everybody's saying, oh, there won't be any bank branches left and stuff. And then, of course, in the early 2000s, it seemed like every other corner of Manhattan was a bank branch or a Starbucks. Yeah. So we're in the first wave. And this is where you get a lot of incremental progress being made. You also get some important building blocks being established by the non-incumbents. And so what I think is interesting about peer-to-peer lending is not that we're lending billions of dollars through peer-to-peer. It's that we've established that it's possible to lend money without bank intermediation. That's a really important thing, because at the end of the day, all banks do is intermediate. If it was just you and I in the world, you had money, I needed money, you'd lend me the money, we'd agree the terms, who needs a bank, right? But because there's hundreds of millions of people in this country, billions of people in the world, we've created this banking system. So now, if I want to borrow money, You effectively lend money to your bank. That goes through a set of complex central mechanisms to my bank where I borrowed the money. So in the next wave, I think, some of these principles that are being established will start to come together. And for me, the most important technologies that are out there right now are distributed ledger technologies in all of its variants and everything that's going on with machine learning and artificial intelligence. Why? Because it allows finally to deliver a much more powerful experience for the customer. And for me, it's possible in my sort of third wave of this, which I would see as being a sort of 10 to 20 year wave, to imagine a fundamental re-architecting of the system using these technologies to create a much lower cost, much faster, much more effective and safer banking system. You do that by taking out the intermediation function. So if you're a pension fund and you want long-term liabilities, you can use distributed ledger technology to connect to people who want mortgages. You can also use machine learning and AI and all of that to match the people together with the same risk appetite, risk profile, and so on. So for me, you can see that happening in a 10 to 20 year time frame, and when that happens, the system is going to fundamentally change. In the meantime, there'll be lots of progress along the way, and as we know, also lots of missteps.
Now, of course, you've been dominantly based in the UK for your recent career, but we've seen some interesting stuff happening there. We've got some of these neobanks emerging, Starling and Monzo, Atom, and others coming out there. You know, you talk about P2P, of course, Zopa, the first real P2P platform, came out of the UK. You know, we always have this sort of competition between New York and the UK in terms of FinTech, and always sort of talking about different stats to prove, you know, who's the number one FinTech centre. But do you think that we're going to see that third phase or stage of this transformation occur in a developed market, or could it come out of developing economies?
So we were actually talking about this before we came on. I think some of the most interesting work is going on in the developing world. We were talking about M-Pesa in Kenya. I've spent a lot of time in Kenya. Basically, it's a whole banking system based on what we would call feature phones, not even smartphones.
Yeah.
And of course, WeChat and Tencent have done a fantastic job in China. Of course, it's so much easier to do something new when you don't have any legacy that's pulling you back. And of course, creating something is better than having nothing. So again, I think there are lessons that can be learned from the developing world, but I still see massive opportunity in the developed economies because the financial services sector is the biggest sector of any developed economy, and it doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well for the end users. It doesn't work very well for banks, frankly, because their return on equity is pretty poor. And 8 years on from the crisis, can we really say that the system is as safe as we want it to be? There's no doubt that it's safer, but is as safe as we would like it to be. So taking some of these learnings from around the world and putting them together in the way that fast-moving transformation happens is what's going to drive this. And I think there's lessons from the developing world and from the developed world.
So tell me about your startup that you've got, 10X Future Technologies. Tell me where you got the idea for it and what you guys are trying to accomplish.
So when I sort of moved out of the official banking world, there were many things that I could have done, but I was fascinated by this transformation, which I always believed was going to happen, and wanted to be part of it. So I began to think about what would a completely new banking system look like, and not one that was just a bit better, but one that was 10 times better. What would that feel like to the customer? What would it feel like to the bank? What would it feel like for society? And I thought about what technologies could we use to deliver that kind of transformation. And we initially started to think about, well, could we use distributed ledger? Our conclusion was it was a bit too soon for that. But we began to put together a small team and start to really understand the problem we were trying to solve. Now, the problem we're trying to solve is not that there aren't smart people in banks, committed people, there is not those fantastic resources and great knowledge, brand, and all of those things. It's that it's very, very difficult for incumbent players to transform themselves.
So let me just drill down on that for a second, and I want to come back to the tech. But Is it your position that in respect to this technology transformation, that a fintech or a startup like you've built has a speed and cost advantage to an incumbent in terms of deploying the tech?
Yes. And the reason why is it's not a kind of mechanical thing. It's actually as much a cultural thing as anything else. Right. And I know because I used to deal with these issues. Again, it's not that there's bad intent or lack of imagination, but when you're very familiar with doing things in a certain way, and the organization is architected around that, it is very hard to change it. It's human behavior. You know, when cloud computing comes along and all you've ever done is run mainframe and mid-range data centers, it's a sort of strange idea that it's hard to get your head around. And this is why it's very rare to find incumbents who truly build the next wave of service in any industry vertical. Now, in addition to the cultural problem, of course, banks themselves are weighed down by massive technology estates that go back, to the 60s in some cases, hardware and software, huge costs to keep the lights on with those systems, and then, of course, a huge wave of regulatory change, which is putting more strain on the system. So it's very, very difficult for banks to innovate. And when I set up 10x, what I wanted to do was build a completely clean, transformational platform, which does three things. One, it's designed to really understand what customers want from financial services and to deliver it in a modern, contemporary way. When people say, what does that feel like? I say, take your phone out, look at the 2 or 3 apps you love on your phone. That's what it should feel like. Yeah. And I challenge you today, pull out your phone, look at your banking app. Is that in the top 2 or 3? I don't think so. Secondarily, could we create a super integrated data architecture? Because really all financial services products are on data, right? I mean, more than anything else actually in life, it's just information moving backwards and forwards. And part of the problem for banks today is that that data is completely chopped up across multiple different systems, databases. And so we spent a lot of time building a data architecture to deliver the sort of services I was describing. And then, of course, you've got to have the tech to support all of that. And the tech we're using, I would describe as modern, but it's not completely out there. And we're now in the process of building the platform. The platform will largely be complete by the end of the year, and we'll begin to deploy it next year.
So you see your role as bending space and time for incumbents to help them get on top of these new technologies faster, or?
Yeah, actually, when I started off, I didn't believe that many, if any, incumbents would be interested in what I was doing, because it is bending time, as you said. But actually, what I've sensed among the bank CEOs that I know and talk to is there's now a realization that they have to do something different. And the difference now is, okay, I still got to keep my digital programs running over here, but if I'm going to really respond to the existential threat, I need to do something different over here. So I'm going to greenfield this thing, use a platform like 10x, stand it up, make it work, and then I've got choices. So then I can choose to migrate over, I can run this in a particular product line or geography, but I've got choices. It's really the only solution for the incumbents. But frankly, we've been approached by many other parties about 10x. The private equity world is very interested in it because when they buy and sell financial services businesses, they're always looking for something that can step their cost base down dramatically. And frankly, we've also been approached by some non-banks who are looking to get into financial services and like the fact that they can just kind of connect our services to their digital customer base.
So we often talk about fintech versus incumbent, and I asked that question of you guys earlier for a purpose. Do you think we're now starting to see sort of this merger between these two worlds where collaboration and cooperation is becoming a key theme, particularly for fintechs who are looking for revenue?
Yeah, I think financial services is so big and complex. There's lots of opportunity in there. There's opportunity for banks to kind of deliver the sort of incremental change I described. There's opportunity for pure play standalone fintechs, although as we're finding, it costs a lot of money to build a brand in financial services and to acquire customers. there's lots of opportunity for collaboration, but it's not as easy as it looks. And I'm sure there are some fintech businesses out there who have been working with banks, and they had a very nice conversation with
There's
the CEO.
one right here.
18 months ago, and they're still talking to somebody in compliance about
Exactly.
it. Maybe somebody, there's a lady laughing on the front. She's been through this experience. And, in 3 years' time, you might have some MVP out there, by which time, of course, everything will have moved on. It'll be completely different. So collaboration is not as easy as it looks. Again, it's not because there's bad intent in the banks. It's just they're just not architected for innovation. And then I think more kind of transformational plays like the one we're working on will definitely have a place to play. Frankly, I applaud any innovation in the category because I think it's good. And what we saw from the early days of the internet was the first things out of the gate weren't the ones that necessarily won. I mean, Google wasn't the first search engine out there. Facebook wasn't the first social media. So it's the organizations that can solve the problem better, often by building on the work that people that have gone before them have done.
Absolutely.
And that's the phase that we're in now. It's what I like to think of as the end of the beginning. We've had, the FinTech, we've had the financial crisis. We've had technologies changing very profoundly, mobile, 4G, cloud, start of machine learning, AI, distributed ledger. And we've had the rise of the fintechs. All of this is just the end of the beginning. What comes next is going to be profound.
Yeah, if you work for a fintech and you're trying to collaborate with banks, you could be forgiven for thinking it's the procurement's job to kill your business. But anyway, so I'm interested in the cycle in terms of development of 10x. Where are you at in that, and when will you sort of be out to market with? I know you've got the platform stood up now, but when will your first major release be out there?
Yeah, so we invested a lot of time in the design of the data architecture and the platform because that really is where the problem is solved, right?
Yeah.
It's quite easy to stand up a pretty basic cloud core banking thing, but that's not what we're doing. So we've done that. We're now deep in the engineering of the platform, and that will complete pretty much by the end of the year. And so we expect to be in market around the middle of next year.
Yep. Now you were at the helm of Barclays, of course, and you know the industry very well. So if you were the CEO of a major bank today, you hadn't decided to go off into the fintech thing, what would you be doing right now?
I would continue to try and firstly educate my organization on just how profound this threat is. And I know how difficult that is because in 2010, I stood up in front of the retail bank in Barclays and said, I've got news for you, your world is going to change. And they looked at me like I was mad because the whole business was based on bricks and mortar and people.
Right.
Now, of course, technology has begun to change that. So firstly, it's about sensitizing people inside the organization. But frankly, if you're running a big bank, you just don't have time for people to get it. So you have to make some radical moves. And that involves, in my view, setting up some greenfield operations completely outside, ring fence them from the existing, partner with the fintechs if that's going to help you get there faster. But again, to your point, you've got to build a big fat wall between that set of activities and the procurement department because as soon as procurement or internal audit or any of these, they're all well-meaning and they've all got their jobs to do, as soon as they start to get involved, it just kills the thing dead. So that's the bold.
Anyone from procurement here, by the way? So we got one last question to finish off. What are the skills that are going to matter over the next 5 to 10 years? Obviously, we've got enough bankers in the banking industry, and we've got enough credit loan officers and risk officers and things like that. What are the skills that people should be investing in?
Yeah. So I think there's basically 3 categories of skills that you need to do this work. Firstly, there's 3 categories of skills and one very important mindset. The 3 categories are, firstly, you have to be able to think about the customer in a profound way, right? You have to be able to reimagine the customer experience, going from what is really financial services about. At the end of the day, it's about solving problems in your life if you're an individual, right? It's not about the mortgage, it's about buying the house. It's not about the loan, it's about buying the car. It's not about the IRA, it's about retirement. So you need that kind of set of skills, really deep customer experience skills. The second thing you need domain expertise. This is not a vertical where you can go at it if you don't understand what you're doing. It's just too complicated. But I'll come back to that. And the third is you need a deep understanding of the technology, not only where it is today, but where it's going. And if you all out there in the audience take one thing away from today, it's spend some time investing in understanding what's going on with the technology. Not just things like distributed ledger, but things like voice, which I think is going to be big. And finally, though, in addition to those 3 buckets of skills, the most important thing you have to have, whether you're coming from a FinTech, from an existing bank, from a company like ours, is you've got to have a radical mindset. Because the future is not going to be the same as the past. Yeah. It's going to be non-linear, and you have to be able to think of the world that way.
Well, Anthony, thanks for sharing your insights with us. Just before we head off, how can people find out about 10x Future Technologies?
10xbanking.com is our website. It's numerals 10, letter X, banking.com.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today.